they wouldn't help me. The next day at school, I confided in my new friend. I didn't originally plan to go into strict detail and began with a vague description of the sounds, ending my explanation with, "But you know, it could just be a squirrel or something living in the walls. We did just move in after all." I expected him to make fun of me, possibly agree with the animal theory. Instead, he looked serious. "That's exactly what the last kid was talking about," Tom mumbled. "Who?" I asked, excited to get a possible explanation, yet fearful of what he may say. Tom faced me with what looked like fear in his eyes. "I heard about a boy who used to live up in that house years ago. He disappeared, and his parents ended up moving away with his sister. Up until then, though, everyone said he complained about footsteps in his room." "Only in his room?" "According to my sister, his room was the one on the opposite side of the house from the living room. She said she'd been there before when the county was renovating it." My blood ran cold. He was talking about my room. I was afraid, but continued to question him for the rest of the lunch hour. By the time I arrived home, I'd come to a revelation. A family of 4 had lived in the house before us. Their son used to have the same room as mine and complained about footsteps every night before he disappeared. Before that, people in town speculated that the house was haunted by the first owners, who'd been brutally murdered in that room one night. Naturally, I asked my parents, but they merely shrugged it off and refused to look into the matter. It was frustrating, yet understandable. They never even bothered to watch television, let alone look into local rumours. A few nights after that, the sounds started again. They seemed rather distinct this time. I was frightened, but as I lay there in my bed, prepared for the footsteps I'd come to expect, I resolved myself to not include my parents. Just as expected, the footsteps started. As they reached my bed once more, I braced myself for some unknown force. Instead, I heard another scream. This one was just as blood-curdling as the first one, yet higher pitched and guttural. I covered my ears to block it out, but it did little to help. Then suddenly, it stopped, as though it was cut short. I listened intently for any further sounds, but none came for the rest of the night. After that experience, I came to learn that this thing could not cause harm. Rather, it was just there to frighten me. After a month, I became immune to the sounds. I got a fan to drown out the quieter ones and would no longer bolt up in my bed at the screams. As expected, my parents never heard any of it. Another month went by, and I'd developed a bond with Tom. He and I would explore the fields, trade scary stories, and make theories about what the ghost wanted from me. He seemed intrigued by the supernatural and showed me what he called the ghost truck at the edge of a nearby pasture. According to him, it would drive away of its own accord on random nights and reappear with blood on its seats. None of this was proven, though we did talk about someday camping out in the pasture to spy on it to see if it moved. We never did. Months went by. The sounds and the footsteps gradually began to decrease in frequency. Originally, I'd hear them 3 to 5 times per week, but now they only occurred at random intervals. Not that I was complaining. Nonetheless, I never let Tom spend the night. I only ever went to his place. Luckily, my parents never questioned this. After a year, the sounds stopped altogether, and my parents had finally saved up enough money so they could choose to buy a new house. Needless to say, I was relieved. We ended up moving to the other end of town. I'd have to get a ride from Tom's parents in order to visit him outside of school from now on, but that was fine by me. Years have passed, and I've all since forgotten about that room. Tom and I still get in touch. We're both attending the same high school now, and every now and then we drift back onto the subject of the supernatural. I plan on getting my own apartment once I'm old enough. You may be wondering why I've bothered to tell you any of this. Well, there is a reason. About a month ago, the house was being prepped for another renovation. We'd been moved out for years, and my parents still never bothered to watch the news. I did. What I learnt was disturbing. Our old house is now closed to the public, and it's under investigation. While the renovators were trying to remove a dead animal from under the house, they'd stumbled upon a cellar that was blocked off by a board disguised as part of the outer wall. This cellar was small, but deep enough for standing room. Inside, they found butcher knives, axes, hooks, and a mass quantity of blood. Upon further investigation, I discovered that around that time I was living in that house, there was a large number of missing children from the nearby counties. The missing children's reports went back to before I ever moved in, and included a young boy around the same age who'd once lived there too. Naturally, I wanted to look further into this, and I asked Tom what he'd learned. Aside from the fact that the ghost truck had been missing ever since the sounds in that room ceased, I learned something even more frightening. The small cellar was found just under my room.